As I'm sure some of you are probably aware, I am very interested in the missing 411 cases, the really strange ones, right? Like there's some of these that just don't make any sense. I kind of wanted to do a video on one of them that just really stood out to me, or another video, I guess. I've already went over one story previously that had to do with the brother and the sister in I believe it was Missouri. But this story, man, buddy. But this story comes from Mount Shasta, California. Apparently, there have been a lot of disappearances around Mount Shasta, on the mountain and around it, and this one just so happened to happen around Mount Shasta at a place called Fowler's Campground. It was the disappearance of a child, and it didn't last long. I think the kid was only missing for like 5 hours. They did find him, and he was okay, so it doesn't have a bad ending, but it has a strange ending. Really strange. So there's some conflicting reports of when this happened exactly. According to most of the information I could find, it either happened September 2010 or 2011. The family wanted to remain anonymous, so they still don't, and they haven't given the name of the juvenile, at least not that I could find, that actually disappeared, and I guess it really doesn't matter. At the time of the disappearance, the kid was 3.5 years old. This family was camping near Mount Shasta at Fowler's Campground. I'll show you where that's at in relation to Mount Shasta. Mount Shasta's big. It's a big mountain. Like, it's pretty serious. I'll show you here on Google Earth. So this is Mount Shasta from the side. This is where the disappearance happened. Fowler's Campground. Now, as you can see, there's a little bit of a higher area, maybe like a mesa, something like that. There's a river between the campground and the mesa. I think it's the McLeod River. So there's the campground, and this is apparently where the disappearance happened, a river, and then this big, just hilly mesa type area. Okay, so apparently the initial disappearance happened around 1800 in the evening at Fowler's Campground. You can see it right there next to the river. The brother and sister were just hanging out around the campground, I guess, playing, doing whatever. The sister says she turned away to look at something else just quickly. And when she turned back, her brother was gone. Just seemingly disappeared. She didn't hear anything. Didn't see anything else happen. He just was there and then gone. And this is pretty typical of a lot of missing 411 cases. The initial disappearance itself is just, especially around groups of people, it's inexplicable, right? Like, people will be looking at these individuals. They will turn away, turn back, the individual's just gone. She notified the parents, of course, and they did, an initial search, I guess, to try and find him, because how far could he have gone, right? He's 3.5 years old, could not have gone far. They couldn't find him, so then they contacted the authorities. The authorities initiated a full search. It's a 5-hour ordeal. I mean, it was a full search for this missing kid. 5 hours later, they did end up finding him laying in a thicket on a trail that had already been searched multiple times by several parties involved in the search effort. They were, I guess, so relieved, and this is another typical thing with these disappearances. They seem like isolated incidents, and the people that are involved in them are so relieved that the person is back. They don't really investigate further on how this could have happened, So fast forward 3 weeks later, the boy his grandmother is watching him, or he's visiting his grandmother, and his grandmother's name is Kathy or Catherine. The little boy called her Cappy, Kappy, I guess. And I guess he was just talking to her, and he happened to mention that she was a lot nicer than the other Cappy. He says he didn't like the other Cappy. His grandmother, I guess, was, kind of taken aback. What do you mean the other Cappy? I am the only Cappy. I'm your grandmother. So he began to tell her the story of the other Cappy. And he says that when he was at the campground, he saw Cappy at the edge of the forest motioning to him to follow her. He does. She takes him uphill to a cave. Now, I'm assuming uphill means as in uphill, right? You can see the campground's right here. They would have had to cross that, but that doesn't look very serious. It's just rocks and a little bit of water, and then uphill, which could be anywhere in this area. And now, also, you got to keep in mind the kid's 3.5. So he's probably not relaying things with the accuracy that we can rely on too much. But he did mention it was uphill. And it was a cave. And inside the cave, there were spiders, purses, and guns, he said. This, I guess, on a retelling, it also changed into there were other things inside the cave. And the kid, I guess, relayed this in a later telling, so take it all with a grain of salt, right? Like I said, 3.5 years old. He said she climbed a ladder and the light made her look like a robot. He said there were other robots too, but they didn't move. They looked like people. And she said she had him lay down so that she could look at his tummy. Then she took him back to the river and said to wait under a bush until someone found him. So I guess they did ford the river after all. Now, some accounts of this differ. Some state that he had a dog with him, and the dog was found before the kid was, and the dog was curled up on the bank of that river, and had been soaked and was shivering, and apparently very frightened. On the initial telling, he said that he didn't mention a ladder. He said that he looked at the cave with the spiders and purses in it, and then turned back to Cappy, and he said her head was glowing. He then realized this was the other Cappy. She kept asking questions that he didn't know the answers to, and when he couldn't provide the answers, I guess, that the other Cappy wanted, she told him to leave the cave. And he says he stepped out of the cave on his own at that point and ended up at a thicket where he was found on that trail. When the boy told his grandmother this, it scared her because she had also 1 year prior had her own experience on Mount Shasta. And we'll get to that in a minute. Apparently, she went to the father, said, "Hey, he told me this story. Has he mentioned this to you?" And turns out he had mentioned it to the father. The father had, obviously taken it with a very large grain of salt, as the kid is 3.5 years old, and had not really given too much thought to it. The grandmother probably would have done the same, except for what happened to her 1 year prior. So, rewind 1 year, same campground, Fowler's Campground. The grandmother, Cappy, had went camping with a friend of hers. She says that while they were sitting around the campfire that night, they kept noticing a pair of red eyes staring at them from the forest. When she first saw the eyes, she attempted to grab her torch and light up the area just to see what the source was. She says that the eyes immediately took off. They couldn't tell, I guess, which direction specifically, but she couldn't light up what was basically who the eyes belonged to. She did say they were red. This continued to happen throughout the night. Apparently, they would see them in different locations in the forest around their camp. Every time they tried to light up the source with a torch, the eyes would dart off or just vanish. So they were not able to get light on source to find out, what kind of animal it was. So they thought, well, okay, it must be a pretty quick animal, prey animal, probably no real need for concern, I guess, to them. And so they decided to go to bed. Now, she slept in a tent, and her friend slept in a camper, I guess next to the tent nearby. And they didn't have anything else happen to them that night. In the morning, when she woke up, she realized she was, in fact, not in her tent. She was outside, face down in the dirt. Okay? Outside of her tent, just outside of it. She says she immediately felt pain on the back of her neck. She reached behind her neck and felt a cut or some kind of small puncture wounds. She says she felt very sick. In fact, she was violently ill from this. When she was able to stand up, she noticed that her friend was also on the ground, face down in the dirt, outside of his camper. He was extremely disoriented as well, felt sick. When he came to, I guess they both were probably asking, what happened. And he had the same wound on the back of his neck. Eventually they came up with the idea that maybe they had been bitten by a poisonous spider. And it had made them become sick, delirious, and they had wandered out of their shelters. Since their wounds were more like puncture marks, and it would also explain why they feel so bad, and if delirium had set in or some kind of fever, then maybe it's possible in the heat of the fever they could have stumbled outside. It took several days for them to get over this apparently, and then had just chalked it up to getting bitten by a poisonous spider, and that was it. Until the boy told her his story. Okay, so I know you're thinking the obvious thing is he's 3.5 years old. All right. You got to take a lot of the stuff, who knows what is real and what's not, okay? What's part of his imagination, because some of the details of what he's relaying don't really match up. I would encourage you, and I may do other videos on this, because apparently Mount Shasta has a very long and storied history of really strange disappearances. There was one this year, actually, in May, I believe it was. Despite the elements of his story, look at the more concrete parts of it, okay? His sister turning her head, turning back, and he's gone. 5-hour search, and then they find him in a location that's already been searched. This is a recurring theme with missing411. A lot of the time, if they find something, it's in an area that's already been searched. And there's been more than one account of them finding the people they're looking for, in an area that's already been searched, and they're alive. Or they'll find their belongings, and a lot of the times they'll find clothes, the clothes the people were wearing. And in more than one account, the clothes were just folded and neatly lying on a trail, on a rock, on a tree, as if they were being presented to the searchers. Strange stuff. Missing411 mainly focuses on national parks. I would encourage you to look it up if you want to hear some really strange stories, and there are a lot of them. There are also books written by an individual that used to be a former police detective. His name is David Politis. He's the guy that kind of got the ball rolling on this and did most of the legwork on the accounts, and has written many books. And there's actually on YouTube, I think there's a couple of feature-length films on the phenomenon that he's produced. Interesting stuff. The one thing that I know for sure: never go into the woods unarmed. Don't go backpacking alone. When I go out there, I want to see what's out there. I want to see what's around the next bend. It's a big world. There's a lot to see, a lot to experience, and there's a lot we don't understand about how things work and why they work the way they do, as far as nature goes, and the natural laws of the universe. You can draw your own conclusions on this. I'm not going to draw any for you, but it is strange.